This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime, comedy, celebrity interviews, or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use, but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
Hi, I'm Dana Stevens, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Deadpool and Wolverine absolutely the out of the box office edition. It's Wednesday, July 31st, 2024, and on this week's show, we'll be talking about the new superhero movie Deadpool and Wolverine, which teams two X-Men with the Disney universe, the proliferation of online memes that has come in the wake of the announcement that Kamala Harris is all but assured, pending her official nomination at the Democratic Convention later this month, to be the Democratic presidential candidate. And finally, Eno, a new documentary about the composer, artist, legendary music producer Brian Eno, that its makers have called the first generative feature film, and we'll get into what that means in the segment. I am joined today live in the Slate studio by critic Stephen Metcalf. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, Dana.
Nice to see you again.
Lovely to see you.
From Los Angeles, where she is a fellow at the Annenberg School, Julia Turner. Hello, Julia.
Hello, hello.
Also, for two of this week's topics, the Deadpool Wolverine movie and the Kamala Harris meme explosion, we are very happy to be joined from Charlottesville, Virginia, by longtime friend of the Culture Fest, Jamel Bowie. Hey, Jamel.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Very happy to have you. Jamel is, of course, an opinion columnist for the New York Times. He also, we should mention, since you guys are all podcast fans who are listening, co-hosts the wonderful podcast Unclear and Present Danger about, what would you say, Jamel? It's about the genre of political thrillers of the 90s?
Yeah, about the political and military thrillers in the 1990s and other stuff, too. We just are about to do an episode on Mars Attacks, which is not really the political or military thriller, but kind of thematically appropriate for the podcast. Anyway, if you saw the movie on USA or TNT in 1998, then we probably going to talk about it.
I do have to say, I literally just saw The Rock with my children on Friday and quickly turned to Jamel's podcast episode about it, where I learned an absolutely insane fact about the run-up to the Iraq War, which included that there was some intelligence about chemical weapons that people thought was real, and then someone scrutinizing it was like, actually, chemical weapons don't come in little green glass globules, and the fact that detail is in this intelligence means that it's false. And you'll have to go listen to Jamel's podcast to figure out whether or not that important bit of information made it to any decision makers in time to prevent the Iraq War, or you can look at history to see what happened.
All right, let's get into our first topic this week. It's Deadpool and Wolverine. This past weekend, something happened that has not happened in a while, and that might make you feel either nostalgia or queasy deja vu, depending on your Marvel feelings. A Marvel superhero movie triumphed at the box office and set several records, including the highest grossing opening ever for an R-rated movie, and the biggest opening for any movie since Avatar: The Way of Water a couple years ago. In an era when Marvel's domination has appeared to be waning, this comes as a surprise, but what's unusual about Deadpool and Wolverine, directed by Sean Levy, is that the two Marvel Comics characters it features were not previously part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe at all. They were owned by 20th Century Studios until 2019, when Disney acquired Fox and folded its assets into their own. If all this sounds like a cynically business-focused reason to make a buddy movie, well, you should see Deadpool and Wolverine, which very openly and self-consciously builds that cynicism into its storyline and much of its dialogue. In the movie, Hugh Jackman's claw-fingered Wolverine, who died nobly sacrificing his life in his character's last chapter, Logan, returns via the consequence-undoing magic of the multiverse and teams up with Deadpool, a superhero, played by Ryan Reynolds, of course, whose superpower appears to be nihilistic wisecracking. In this clip from the trailer, you will hear Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool razzing Hugh Jackman's Wolverine in a bar, where he's found the reclusive X-Man drowning his sorrows in whiskey.
I told you, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome anywhere. Now get the fuck out of my bar.
Just give me one more drink and then I'll leave.
Hi, Peanut. I'm gonna need you to come with me right now.
Look, lady, I'm not interested.
All right, well, I'm sort of on the tick-tick, so upsy daisy. Here we go. Oh, whiskey dick of the claws. It's quite common in Wolverines over 40.
You don't want this.
Unless you want to take a deep breath through your fucking forehead, I suggest you reconsider.
All right, Jamel, I'm going to start with you here because you have long been one of the Culture Gabfest's go-to comic book gurus. I know that being a comic book reader doesn't mean you read every series about every character, so I'm curious about two things. First of all, I want to know what your history is with these two characters in the comics and in the movies, and also what you think about, or if you have any thoughts about this merger, this acquisition that has given rise to the idea of pairing these two superheroes for the first time.
I mean, my history with Wolverine, I feel like is that of many comics readers of my generation. Like Wolverine was sort of one of the dominant characters, like one of the most popular characters through the 90s into the 2000s. And I read a lot of X-Men. So I have a lot of fond memories of Wolverine, you know, watched the animated series, the Bryan Singer movies, recently revisited that first one, which is actually still pretty good. And I like Hugh Jackman's performance of Wolverine over the years. I mean, it's almost 25 years at this point of this performance, and I think it's a very strong one. I never really read much Deadpool. I've seen the Deadpool movies. I got to be totally honest. I don't like the character. I don't like Ryan Reynolds. And I find the whole conceit to be just incredibly irritating. You know, the team up is interesting. I mean, the purchasing of Disney's purchase of Fox Studios and that being sort of a metatextual part of the movie, and the movie being about sort of the incorporation of these characters into the Disney MCU is sort of like an interesting way to approach it. But I know going into it, it's not as if I was like, can't wait to see Wolverine and Deadpool team up. It's sort of, I mean, I'm sure there are people who were very excited, but for my part, it's sort of like, let's see how they do this. I'm kind of interested in how they manage this whole project. But, you know, if this movie had never been made, I would have not been like asking for it.
Right. I mean, the marketing campaign has it's really been blanketing, at least here in New York, blanketing buses. You know, it's on TV constantly before every movie. The marketing campaign seems to be relying on the idea that there is some audience out there that's longing for these two characters to team up, which, given how different the characters are kind of ethically and morally, just seems like it's a strange team to wish for, right? Like the nihilist and what Wolverine seems to me to be is this sort of super sincere, you know, brooding, reclusive kind of hero. Steve, you're looking at me with a mysterious set expression that either means you're about to go into a fulminating rant or, you know.
No. I don't have a fulminating rant, but I definitely have shit to say. I mean, the meta story for me is not the one this movie shoves down your throat for 2.5 or whatever hours it is. To me, it's the death of Barbenheimer, this great hope that highly original, unexpected content based on, I mean, obviously one's based on a doll, the other on a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography, but not in the Marvel or Star Wars sense based on IP, might come to dominate the box office, and unexpected auteur-driven cinema, you know, would be the blockbuster cinema of the future. Silly us. Corollary to that was the idea that the MCU was petering out. It's had a series of, by their standards, commercial flops. It seems to be completely, to my mind, out of creative energy. Joke's on me. Nope, here we go. If we do this podcast for another 15, 20 years, we'll still be talking about this shit when I have one foot deeply in the grave. I dislike this movie intensely. I'm not familiar with the Deadpool character. We're really that familiar with Reynolds, to be honest. It brought home to me how self-conscious and self-aware aren't always exactly the same thing, or a distinction could be drawn between them. This movie to me is like spending 2+ hours with a highly intelligent 13-year-old boy who had cold baby boomer parents who left him alone with his laptop and his iPhone, who's got ADHD as a consequence, and grew up online and playing video games. It's amusing at first. There's a lot of intelligence and real humor behind this, sometimes genuinely funny. I laughed, but I will say only out loud maybe once or twice, but ultimately completely exhausting. And for the long-term health of that boy and the idea that there are $500 million worth of them latent in the world, the long-term prospects for that boy in the world, to me, are exceedingly worrisome. At the end, I was completely disgusted by what I saw.
Oh, I'm not sure I would read like the fall of mankind into this movie, which is wearing like a skin of nihilism on a squishy heart of world-saving redemption, which you may or may not like or value that much. But like, I don't know, it's just a Marvel movie. It's an interesting cycle of a Marvel movie. I mean, the thing that's interesting to me about it, so for whatever reason, we have not discussed the prior two Deadpools. I'm not really sure why. It just must have been a glut of other stuff the weeks that those came out for us. But this is my first time watching the character, even though obviously the dominance of Deadpool at the box office when the first two films came out was much discussed. The notion of a truly foul-mouthed, sexualized, R-rated, shit-talking superhero was kind of delightfully transgressive and box office winningly transgressive when it happened. And the question of what, cozy sparkle dust Disney was going to do with this character was one that was, open, I think, for fans. But what struck me about this is that, yes, it's dirtier. Yes, it's smuttier. Yes, there are more actual swears. But the kind of punches and wisecracks rhythm of it didn't actually seem like a radical disruption in the superhero universe. It just seemed like a throwback from the second half of Marvel of like gigantic grayscale universes collapsing in the sky type Marvel movies to the earlier Joss Whedon Avengers, like superheroes and wisecracks. These are just like dirtier wisecracks. So instead of seeming like a wild deviation from superherodom as we've known it, it actually just kind of seemed like a throwback to the type of superhero movie that caused the beginning of the Marvel juggernaut in the first place. And I will defer to Jamel on whether that is comparing Deadpool to the Joss verse is, some wild heresy in interpreting these films. But the whole thing seemed kind of retro. And I'm also not sure that its dominance means that the promise of Barbenheimer is dead, because I think there is a lot of mischief in this and originality in it. I get that it's sort of cloying and cynical and maybe not your bag, but there's some very funny things in this. Like there's very funny in-jokes if you've been following the narrative of these movies over the years, including like an absolutely absurd and hilarious character played by Channing Tatum, about whom I won't say much more because I think it's a bit spoilery, but there's originality within the structure here that I appreciated. I
think you're right, Julia, to draw the comparison to the Joss Whedon iteration of the MCU. There's a bit of a, to quote a different superhero movie, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, there's a bit of a return to formula aspect to this film in the kind of, you're going to pair recognizable superstar with another recognizable superstar, and just lots of quips, lots of cameos, lots of sort of winks for the audience, lots of fourth wall breaking, and then a pretty down the middle save not necessarily the world but save your friends kind of plot. To my mind, all of that's fine. I think I've just reached total exhaustion with that method of making these kinds of things. And I think I have reached sort of the point where I'm like, please do something different for the love of God. Like there are things I did enjoy about this movie. And again, I think that the aspect of it being very self-referential about sort of like the meta story of superhero movies, like all the, the corporate intrigue and which actors are playing which and what's on the schedule, the weird way in which fans of these things are in their own way think like producers now, in the same way that like a lot of people follow politics think like pundits now. A lot of people who follow these movies think like producers, and that's sort of like a little funny and interesting. But like I don't know, I got to return to the fact that I just find Ryan Reynolds intolerable. It's just like I can't deal with 2 hours of it. That it just sort of steadily diminishes anything that I sort of liked about the movie. Which again, Jack's performance it spoils too much, but the character shows up, and I was very excited to see this character because he's a great actor, underrated actor, and the movie for which he is known is a great movie. But even that is sort of like spoiled a bit or rendered less effective by like ceaseless references to the old things. I don't know. The one superhero movie I have enjoyed, I like genuinely enjoyed and rewatched in the last like 4 years is Matt Reeves's The Batman. And it's because Matt Reeves is at least doing something. there are some ideas there. There's like a take there. It's really, he's trying to do something, and that keeps me interested. This, because it's a return to formula, and because it's sort of a lot of what I've already seen, I just found it hard to sit through.
So I think there's actually a reading of this that it's about like working for a gigantic corporation. Like these two guys, they've had these bosses, their bosses have had bosses, their bosses have had mergers, they're just people trying to be superheroes here in this world. And so many lives in that we encounter that I will not spoil have all been kind of tossed aside or rendered valueless or rendered invisible by the kind of decisions they have no control over that didn't necessarily make any sense. So I think there's kind of like a thematic powerlessness in the face of capitalism undercurrent that sort of humanizes not just the superheroes, but kind of the actors they play him, and the there's no working actor in Hollywood who has not had to encounter the question over the last 20 years, what's my bit in the superhero universe going to be? Which team am I signing up with? Which of these studios? Which role am I going to get? Am I going to turn out to be one of the legends, or am I just going to get some jank part in some jank movie that goes nowhere? Like, I get that it's maybe metatextual and annoying, but I actually think the film plucks some thematic resonances about being kind of workers within Hollywood. And Ryan Reynolds, I will say, listening to him just make those jokes in that trailer, audio only with no physical performance, is excruciatingly horrible sounding. I agree. I actually found him fine on screen. Like, the smarm is, I get that it wouldn't be anybody's cup of tea, but I do think he is like the entrepreneur of this character in these films, and like trying to create something texturally different within that big structure. He's a co-writer of the film. He's kind of famously been a gigantic advocate for this character after being getting a bum superhero card in Green Lantern. So I kind of appreciate that there is a human brain behind this and not just a megalith. And I get that some of it seems retro, or, I get not responding to it well, but I think that might affect my tolerance for this jumble of pointless violence and nihilistic wisecracks, is that the meta stuff is not just winking, it's actually kind of describing a power structure in an interesting way.
Well, fine, we agree to disagree. But before we go, I have to say one thing. I'm not familiar with this IP. I'm not a 13-year-old boy. I thankfully strangled that part of me a long time ago in order to become a grown-up man. So I'm not clear how to interact with what I perceive to be the homophobia of the movie, but it has a red pill vibe to me that says, you can't take a joke. And intelligent people have written intelligently about this, including a piece in The Guardian that people should check out.
Yeah, those are among the things that make this movie feel very dated and not great.
Well, and especially in the back-patting sense that I think Marvel wants to brand Deadpool as this bi character. And some things in past Deadpool movies have indicated that he's interested in men as well as women, but that's used almost entirely for, sort of fearful homophobic innuendo in this movie. All right. Well, people out there will see it because everybody seems to be going to see it. So if you see the Deadpool Wolverine movie and you have thoughts, please write us at culturefest@slate.com. Have you heard who the latest power couple is? Well, you won't see this coming. It's Discover and Cash Back. Feeling let down? You won't be when you hear how Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. All with no sign-up required and no limit to how much they'll match. See? Isn't that a couple you want to root for? Get rewarded no matter who you are or how much you spend with Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia. Identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Before we go on, it's the moment in our show where we talk about le business for the week. Steve, what have we got?
Thanks, Dana. Well, first, a reminder to Slate Plus members, Slate Plus members, the Plus segment's no longer at the end of the normal episode. We've turned that segment into its own mini bonus episode. The episode's available in your feed if you're a Slate Plus, a Slate Plus member. We think this is going to allow you to more easily discover our subscriber content, and that helps us keep the studio lights on, so please check it out. For this segment this week, we're discussing, a listener wrote in to ask us, do we prefer assigned seats in movie theaters or not? So check that out. If you're not a Slate Plus member, I don't know what to say to you at this point. You should become one. It really helps us do what we do and continue to do what we do. So please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Members get ad-free podcasts, lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment I just mentioned. You'll get to hear members-only programming on all the other Slate shows like Slow Burn and Political Gabfest. Members get unlimited access to all the great writing on slate.com. You will never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. I would also mention that you'll be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. These memberships are very, very important to Slate. I cannot stress that enough. I really mean it. It allows this show, related shows, and Slate and journalism to thrive. So get on your horse. You can also subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. All right, back to the show.
Even before the news broke on Sunday, July 21st, that President Joe Biden was dropping out of the 2024 race, the Kamala memes were starting to come together. I remember reading a couple days before that an anonymously sourced quote from some DNC operative saying, "Fuck it, I'm coconut pilled," which, if you're online enough, you know means that you have, in fact, gone over to the Kamala side and started to support her as the vice presidential candidate. Of course, after that announcement, and especially after the president's subsequent announcement that he was essentially passing the torch to his vice president, the coconut pilling went crazy. The internet was covered with Kamala memes. We can get into what some of those were, how they spread. Julia, I'll start with you. Can you give us just some sense of what the internet has looked like since that announcement a little bit over a week ago?
Yeah, there are 2 or 3 main threads here. Jamal, you can correct me if I have this wrong. One is there is a clip of Kamala speaking that seems like it was surfaced actually by Republicans trying to make her look ridiculous or crazy, in which she's quoting her mother saying, you know, sometimes you kids act like you just fell out of a coconut tree, but in fact, here, let's listen to it.
Part of the extension of the work you will do is, yes, focused on our young leaders and our young people, but understanding we also then have to be clear about the needs of their parents and their grandparents and their teachers and their communities. Because none of us just live in a silo. Everything is in context. My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, "I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?" You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
So that clip, we can talk a little bit more about it and why it's been such a resonant text as we proceed. But the coconut quote and the laugh and the context lines have all kind of spawned their own separate meme threads. And that is the origin of being, quote, coconut pilled, or the use of the coconut or palm tree emojis to suggest one's allegiance with Kamala. Then when Kamala declared her candidacy, Charlie XCX, the singer and fan favorite on this show, declared Kamala is Brat, referring to her album Brat, which is popular this summer and suggests kind of a carefree, hedonistic, powerful womanhood. And then the Kamala campaign quickly endorsed that. So there's both the coconut and the context parts of the coconut speech. There's the Brat stuff. And then I think more broadly, there's a through line about Kamala's laugh, which again has been kind of a Republican attack point against her, that somehow her laugh is ridiculous. And then there's been an embracing of laughter. Have I missed any major memes?
I don't think so. I think those are the big ones. And really the central one is the coconut speech, which I always found really charming, especially when it was first surfaced. It was surfaced by Republican Oppo, groups. And I thought it was charming. It sort of reflected the fact that I think both of her parents were Marxist, or at least Marxian academics. And so it feels very kind of like men don't make their own history. But I think those are all the memes. And to my mind, and I'm borrowing this observation from Max Reed, who has a Substack newsletter, as a kind of cultural commentator. And he observed several weeks ago, even a couple of months ago, the popularity of the coconut thing online on TikTok among young people, and that it gave Harris this kind of like California wine mom vibe. That was a distinct kind of personality, public persona from either Kamala Harris, vice president, or like Kamala the cop from the 2020 campaign. And that was really interesting to me, because to me, when I read that, I was like, oh yeah, this is the kind of thing that politicians want. In fact, you want to have this kind of non-political persona that people can project on, that people can have fun with. And I think we've seen, since she's really taken the reins of the Democratic Party at this point, how much that persona has come to the fore, and how much it's really begun to define her nationally, politically. She is Kamala Harris, this sort of like fun, exciting person, not stern law enforcement person or, quiet vice president.
Yeah, quiet and sometimes wobbly vice president. It has been striking, actually, in prepping for this segment. I've just watched a bunch of her talking and various appearances she's made in the last month. And it's like, oh, current Kamala is a different Kamala than 2020 candidate Kamala. Like, she's actually been getting those reps in as VP in terms of her public presentation in a way that I hadn't been tracking, and that I think a lot of people hadn't been tracking. But I think part of what's interesting about all of this is how the fandom helps create a character that's not quite the political person that a hypothetical voter would be voting for, but sort of broadens the sense of who that political person is. I will say, though, it makes me nervous, like serious people flirting with the internet. It seems very honeymoony at the moment, and it feels like those relationships can go sour quickly.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Julia, that not just in relation to the memeage, but, just in general, the massive donations that Kamala has gotten. I mean, just sort of how well this transition has gone so far is something that if you're used to watching Dems in disarray, you're naturally going to be kind of tiptoeing on eggshells. But I think it also is a moment for Dems to kind of own the win. Like, we're coming off of a very, very bad period of sort of not being able to do anything right when it came to this campaign. And the fact that there's this surge of energy now seems like a gift horse that shouldn't be looked in the mouth. I had one thing to say about the coconut clip, which I'm glad we listened to in its complete context, because I think if you didn't know that context and know that she was quoting her mother, it is, I think, presented sometimes, certainly I'm sure by Republican operatives, that clip is presented out of context as if, she is just this sort of kooky wine mom who maybe has had like a little too much wine right at that very moment, right, to make her look sort of loopy or something. But the fact is, she is referencing her immigrant parentage there and doing it in this charming, self-deprecating way, that isn't a sort of soapbox mounting, like I am the child of hardworking immigrants, more typical political use of that trope, right? It's a more playful, everyday, like somebody might be sitting around a table doing a sort of, loving imitation of something that their immigrant mother used to say. And so I think people who are children of immigrants who are connected to, communities of immigrants probably relate to that moment in a humorous way that you might not relate to something that was more somberly, spoken in typical poly talk.
Yeah, Dana, I agree with all of that. Leave it to the Democrats to find a cloud surrounding the sun as opposed to a silver lining surrounding a cloud, right? So it's 4 years ago. What about Kamala 4 years ago, who fell quite flat? Derek Jeter got sent back to the minors. It happens. Sometimes your you're ready, but the moment isn't there. But now it all seems to have gestalted together in a way that's astonishing, and I think we should be happy for it. Can it peter out? You can't meme your way out of. Jamel has a great column in today's Times about Gaza in relation to this candidacy. There's no way to meme your way out of that. She has to come up with an answer that's going to satisfy a couple of different, very key constituencies here. That said, my peanut gallery observation as someone who doesn't write about politics for a living is that this may be the first election to be decided on both sides by a passionate sense of solidarity and purpose forged by social media, i.e., I don't think you're going to be able to Willie Horton Kamala, right? And I don't think you're going to be able to butt her emails her. I think that so much of the intensity that is going to drive people to the polls, in addition to the scapegoat energies of, neither red nor blue America wants to live in the other colored America, right? And the media landscape is so fragmented and so ideologically charged that we're not consuming each other's news. And this was shockingly no longer going to be a not Trump referendum in ways that were terrifying. We needed to come up with not just a younger candidate and a more vital candidate, but a candidate into whom one's longing for a political identity to counter Trumpism could be poured. And that, to me, is the biggest thing about these memes.
I think that's absolutely right. In the immediate aftermath of the switch, call it the switch, there were commentators who were like, oh, well, this is, there's a lot of enthusiasm, but this is just like a sugar high. It's like, it's fake, it's just relief and everything's going to come down to earth. But it's been a week and that still hasn't happened. And I think that there is something very real happening here. And I think, Steve, you're absolutely right to connect it to the extent to which Harris does seem to not just be a different path, but like embody a different vision of America, and embody a very different direction the country can take. And people are pouring their aspirations into that. And I do think the memes are indicative of that. I'd also say that the memes, in this interesting way, they've also opened the space for, and Harris's own kind of identity as, like I said, like kind of California wine mom, very normal seeming, has opened the space for just new lines of attack against Republicans. And one thing you're seeing now, and a lot of memes about it, is the notion that Republicans are just weird, or just like strange and bizarre. And I don't think that happens with Biden at the top of the ticket. I think that's very specifically a product of Harris being at the top of the ticket now.
I'm glad you raised the weird thing, because it's not quite a meme. It's more of a talking point, but it's definitely coming through. And there's an interesting dynamic here. I'll come back around to weird in a sec. But one of the things that I think makes the coconut tree meme so powerful is that the first half of it is silly and visual, but the second half, maybe it's Marxism, but it definitely sums up a Democratic Party approach to governance of like, you do have to understand the context. You do have to understand what came before, that a good social policy kind of encompasses the circumstances that left everyone in society where they are and might want to help them navigate the world ahead of them without just assuming that they're like atomized and contextless equivalent atoms of society, right? Like it's part of what makes that meme powerful is it actually does undergird a series of democratic policies and messages and kind of makes it like a resonant bucket into which you can put stuff. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the cultural extension of this, which is creating the grid. It's kind of like the approval matrix or a matrix where the top is what can be and the bottom is burdened by what has been. And the left is thinks she just fell out of a coconut tree. And the right is exists in the context. And people have been putting all kinds of quartets there. So the girls, Jessa is what can be and exists in the context. Hannah is burdened by what has been and exists in the context. Marnie thinks she just fell out of a coconut tree, burdened by what has been. Anyway, it's extensible. Like good memes can travel, but I think part of what makes it sturdy is that underlying context of, do you pause and think about what real equality is? What do you think about the context? Do you care about context? Is actually a powerful question. On the weird front, so I want to shout out Connie Dotis, my fourth grade teacher, wonderful teacher, very good teacher of writing, who banned the word weird from fourth grade because she said it was a lazy, imprecise word and that it did not actually help your writing to call something weird. You needed to more precisely articulate what the problem was. And although I think that is good advice for writing, I'm not sure it's good political advice in 2024 because there has been something puncturing about this talking point for the Democrats. Like, the more that you treat Donald Trump's Republican Party as a gigantic, powerful, menacing threat, the more you empower it, right? In some ways, you're just blowing air into the bouncy castle of Trumpism. And there's something about weird that's just like, whatever, that old guy's so irrelevant, forget it. Come over here, we're having a fun party with pina coladas. Like, it definitely seems effective. It just makes, or at least it seems to take the wind out of Trump's sails. But I also don't love it. Like, one of the things that I think is powerful about the meme explosion for Kamala is that it's almost as though the internet has hyper evolved against meanness, like to figure out how to rebuff the meanness of like mocking a woman's laugh, like mocking someone's joy. And the weird, I don't know. I wonder if the weird could curdle as kind of an empty jab.
You know, I don't think so, precisely because of who it's targeted at. Like, it's not targeted at someone who's just sort of like strange, you know? It's not the weird isn't about sort of like you aren't conforming to social expectations. It's much more about these people have like off-putting and unhealthy obsessions, you know? That so Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, who kind of workshopped this in real time. It's kind of remarkable to watch that interview. It's sort of, he's like workshopping it in real time and then it comes out. He's specifically talking about, you know, like the book banning and the you know, opposition to abortion and all these things. Sort of like, isn't it weird that these people are so obsessed with your personal life? A lot of it was like centered around JD Vance, who does have a kind of an off-putting vibe about him. And I think that's what it's targeted at. And I think that's like, I think it comes through clearly in its use. It's not like it's less like Jonathan Majors weird and more like Blake Masters, the Arizona Senate candidate who had an ad where he shot a gun into the air. And you're just sort of like, okay, what's happening here? Like, what's this guy's deal?
Yeah, why do Republicans kill their puppies?
Right. Like Kristi Noem bragging about the fact that she killed a dog. That's weird.
That's fucking weird. Yeah, there's weird and there's fucking weird. Those people are fucking weird.
Well, speaking of memes, I mean, I don't know if you guys are as terminally online as me so that you're aware of the JD Vance fucked a couch meme.
I was trying to get there.
I mean, we can't leave off a discussion of summer of 2024 memes without that one. And I mean, I recall describing that over the weekend, having cracked my own online JD Vance couch joke and enjoyed many others, trying to explain it to an offline sane friend over dinner. And she at once laughed very hard at some of the jokes, her favorite being, when I get that feeling, I need sectional healing. But yet she also raised a point not unlike what Julia just did of like, is this in the long term going to be something good for the Democrats? You know, that we're just making up fake mean things and deliberately circulating misinformation because it's funny.
I've been reading a lot about 19th century politics, as is my habit. And 19th century politics is so relentlessly mean that it's just sort of like, I'm like, yeah, what's the issue? You know, like, did JD Vance have sexual relations with the couch? Probably not. Not going to definitively say no, but I'll say probably not. But like the guy fantasizes about sort of like locking women up so they can just be childbearing machines. I think it's okay to be like, doesn't that guy look like he has sex with furniture?
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
All right. Well, the memes will no doubt continue to proliferate. We will keep an eye on the candidacy as it goes on. And as soon as there's another excuse, Jamel, to have you on to talk about something political yet cultural at the same time, we will definitely have you if you'll be here.
Always happy to join.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
On Notes from America, we have conversations with people across the country about how we can truly become the nation that we claim to be. Each week, we talk about race, or politics, education, relationships, usually all of them, because everything's connected. And you, our listeners, are at the center of those conversations. I'm Kai Wright. Join me on Notes from America, wherever you get your podcasts.
The English musician Brian Eno has been many things in a career that spanned over 50 years. A founding member of the innovative band Roxy Music, a producer and collaborator with such artists as David Bowie, The Talking Heads, Laurie Anderson, U2, and more, an experimenter with the emerging genres of ambient and computer-generated music, and a kind of philosopher and coach of the creative process itself, with such inventions as his Oblique Strategies decks, which are cards that contain koan-like prompts to reset one's brain while in the process of working on a project. When Gary Hustwit, the documentary filmmaker who, a few years ago, brought us the movie Helvetica about the history of the typeface by that name, set out to make a documentary about Eno, he wanted to try to approach the act of filmmaking with an Eno-inspired sense of randomized possibility. What you're hearing right now under my voice is some music by Brian Eno, which plays with the trailer. The entire movie is scored with pieces from Brian Eno. So, working with the digital artist Brendan Dawes, Gary Hustwit built a piece of custom software that the creators named Brain One, which is an anagram of Brian Eno. I love that fact. What Brain One does is take over 500 hours of archival footage that the director gathered together, plus about 30 hours of present-day interviews and conversations with Eno at his home, and remix it all into a different 85-minute cut every time the film is shown. There are some elements that recur in each viewing, but neither their order nor the entirety of the content is fixed in place. So that according to the filmmakers, there are something like 52 quintillion possible versions of Eno that could exist. That sounds like a number made up by a fifth grader. Steve, I'm going to start with you on this one because I suspect that of the three of us, you probably have the most familiarity with and connection to Brian Eno's earlier career as a musician and a record producer. Maybe I'm wrong. I wanted to hear first what your thoughts were about his work going into the documentary and then how they changed on coming out. And also, I'd love to hear if you have anything to say about the unusual form this documentary is presented in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a total Enophile. I am fascinated by him as a person and as a thread running through so much music that I care about. I'm a fan of some of the music that features him prominently singing and songwriting in a semi-traditional way, like Another Green World is a classic, kind of a masterpiece of a record. But I'm more interested in this figure, right? This person who is, apropos of the Steve Albini segment that we did recently, this person who is sort of in and around a creative musical project under the rubric of producer, who's a highly non-presumptuous person who wouldn't claim too much credit, if any, for what was created. There's a very funny moment in the documentary, as I saw it, where David Bowie sort of laughs and says, "No, we don't know what he does, but somehow, I'm horribly paraphrasing, but I mean, the fact that you can't quite put your finger on it. He doesn't play an instrument. He has very equivocal, like take it or leave it vocal style. He's not a musician. He himself addresses this. When he first joined Roxy Music, it really was because he was showing, I think, Brian Ferry or maybe the guitarist, I can't remember, how to mess around with a reel-to-reel and produce looping, interesting, weird, layered sounds. And then he took a synthesizer and they stuck him on stage and made him part of the band. And he kind of created auras and essences. So I was delighted by that aspect of the movie. The second thing about, just very quickly, that's always fascinated me is he is a huge fan of my old mentor, the American philosopher Richard Rorty. And in fact, I corresponded with Eno after Rorty died because I wanted him, and he did eventually write something for Slate about Rorty and his influence on him. Couldn't have been more gracious and wonderful. So I went in so just avidly interested in what I was going to see. I learned things that to me were just precious, precious nuggets. For example, here's a perfect example of how he took a band that was on the rise with whom he shared a lot of sensibility, the Talking Heads, but they were still, in some sense, a CBGB's punk, post-punk band in some regard. And he took them to the next level in part because he allowed them to be, he took David Byrne and maybe other members of the band and he played them Fela Kuti, K-U-T-I, who plays this very hornbreak, powerful hornbreak, rhythmic form of African jazz. But then this little twist, he wanted that kind of that particular kind of wall of sound, not the Phil Spector kind, but this kind of wall of sound. But he wanted to replace the horns with vocals, with backing vocals. And so he's kind of describing that in the movie that I saw. And he's watching this video, and as these very familiar sort of stop making sense period Talking Heads, peak period Talking Heads songs, you realize that's exactly what he did. He created this much larger, highly original wall of sound using these backing vocals and this unrelenting Africanized beat. And I thought that was worth it alone. However, in my estimation, it's not a very good movie. And I'm not sure, other than the gimmick of the generative AI, the sort of mimetic gimmick that the movie does what Eno himself does as a producer often, I'm not sure that it made for a better film in the version that I saw. This shuffled deck quality to it struck me in the end as maybe perhaps only gimmicky. That said, hearing from David Byrne, Brian Eno, U2 about what this person did, and Eno himself is just an utter charmer.
Oh, he's such a great interview subject. I mean, I'm surprised that with all the praise you just had for individual moments of the movie, that you didn't like the movie overall.
I was surprised at how pleased it left me, and then left me stranded at pleased. I thought I'd walk out. I walked out of Stop Making Sense, which of course I saw when it came out. When we discussed it, I saw its revival. I walked out high as a fucking kite, right? Like I felt remade by it and sort of renewed by it. And I wanted perhaps too much from this movie.
I mean, it's not a concert movie, so it's not.
No. I know it's different.
It's more cerebral, I guess.
I know it's different.
But I absolutely loved it. All right, I'll talk about my response more in a minute. But Julia, I really am curious now. How did this strike you? And did the form feel really different than you expected? It sounds like possibly Steve and I were in the same screening, because two of the moments that you mentioned were also in mine, and it seems like these screenings can be pretty different from each other. But Julia, what was your response?
Yeah, and actually a couple of the moments that Steve mentioned were also in mine, which, one of the things that's been interesting in reading about the film is that they keep tweaking the dials on it. They've been continuously adding footage to it since it first screened at Sundance earlier this year. And they also apparently kind of tweaked the randomizer to increase the likelihood that certain things appear, I think. And so maybe they've learned over time that there are some anchoring chunks of Eno's life and career that you would feel bad if you walked out of a movie not having heard about, and have sort of figured out how to anchor those in. There were 2 screenings in Los Angeles this weekend. Mine was packed and full of kind of interesting, curious people. And as I was listening to the chatter on the way out, I heard a group comparing that night screening to the one the night before and saying that the second night screening was a better film and kind of had more of the core anchoring chunks of his life and felt a little less random. I was so charmed by it, and maybe it's because I deeply admire Brian Eno without being a devout student or fan, that I didn't want or expect any specific like ravishment or elation from the film, and so I was happy with pleased. And I happened to see it on the anniversary of my dad's death a couple of years ago, and my dad loved music, not particularly Brian Eno's music, but I just really was enjoying spending time in the company of this creative, thoughtful, energetic man, so curious about the power of music and what it does to our bodies and our souls. I found it quite moving. And I kind of enjoyed that the form reflected on Eno's own experiments in generative music. Like I didn't think that the experimental nature did nothing or was a pure gimmick. I have questions about how applicable it would be to other films or subjects or types of storytelling, because the reason it worked here to me had to do with the fact that Eno has enjoyed trying to make some of his music with similar technologies of developing chords and beats and rhythms and then using computers to add and subtract tones and notes or create regenerations within those structures over time. So I enjoyed that. And I'm curious whether you guys had in your screening, apparently at one point he did some project, again, this was like a teeny little chunk that only lasted 2 minutes, where he just got regular people who didn't know how to play instruments into a symphony to play major orchestral productions like the Star Wars theme and various other famous works of music. And so it's just a group of people in a room playing all these instruments badly and causing all these productions to sound kind of like ish. And it was just so delightful. Did you guys get that little bit?
That was in mine, but it wasn't in yours.
It was not in mine.
That's
no.
crazy. That's so interesting.
I mean, it's hearing about the stuff that wasn't in yours that makes it seem exciting and makes you want to see it again. I came out and the New York Times review by Alyssa Wilkinson was blown up on a poster board, in the lobby. And so after seeing it, I read her review. She saw it twice, which if I were writing on it, I would have seen it twice too, right? Just to get a sense. I wish I'd had time to squeeze one more viewing in before our conversation, but I do definitely want to see it again. So Alyssa writes about a moment when Brian Eno mentions working with Devo, which was not in the version that I saw. And she mentions him having written the original Microsoft Windows theme.
Yes,
which was not in the version I
hauntingly
saw.
beautiful. It wasn't in the version I saw either. But I remember that. I had that. It was like a boot up. It was really gorgeous.
See, now I want to hear that sound and I want to hear him talking about it. And it made me excited about the generative possibilities of the film. I mean, here's what I'll say about this movie is that I enjoyed it while watching it, right? I was moved at parts, just utterly charmed by his presence. He's such a true artist. Like, it's just so great to see someone who is not, performing the role of the brooding artist, who's a very down-to-earth guy, but who is just constantly thinking about art and music and philosophy and life. Yeah. And who's just constantly asking questions. Like at one point he said in one of the interview segments, I wonder if y'all both saw this, why do we like music? This has obsessed me my whole life, is why do people want to listen to sound organized into these patterns? What does it mean? And I have a feeling that this is in every version, that this is one of the fixed segments. But did you hear him going on YouTube to listen to the Silhouettes, the doo-wop group?
Yes.
Beautiful moment, right? It's his earliest musical memory. And he heard this kind of classic doo-wop song being sung on a probably like American Bandstand type show. And he was a small child and he just became obsessed. He said, I knew nothing at the time about this was American music. This was black music, what tradition it came from. It was just these people going shoo-be-doo, wop, bop-ba-dop-ba-doo, bop, like these little vocal sounds that obsessed him. And you can completely see how that idea of patterned sound, that's taking different forms went on to influence his whole life. I couldn't recommend this more. I think it's one of the most interesting documentaries I've seen this year, for sure. So I hope if people get a chance, they'll go and see it. Unfortunately, right now, this is only showing in New York and Los Angeles. I think it's going to be difficult to get this to streaming because of the if you want to call it the gimmick, like the nature of the form. They're sort of trying to figure out, like, do we make different versions of it and release them all on streaming? So it's going to be out there. It seems like there is at least a tentative release schedule that's planned that's a little bit broader than that, but its future is a little bit uncertain. So just put it down, scribble it down in your to-be-seen notebook and try to catch Eno if and when you can. We'll put anything we know about it in this week's show notes on Slate.
Hey, it's Carvel Wallace, host of Slate's podcast How To, and we just hit our 5-year anniversary. That's over 250 episodes of life-changing advice on every topic imaginable. And so to celebrate, my co-host Courtney Martin and I recently talked with the show's founder, Charles Duhigg.
We had a guest on once, and we were talking about talking to your kids about sex. And she said, you would never have one conversation with your kids about table manners, right, and then assume that their table manners are going to be good for life, right? Instead, you have like 1,000 conversations with your kids about table manners.
Oh shit, Charles! Now I'm worried I haven't had enough table manners conversations. We definitely talked about sex a lot, but I don't know how much we've talked about table manners.
Just as long as they don't have sex at the table, they're good to go.
So far, so
as long
good.
as they know how to spoon, even if they don't know which spoon to use, it'll totally work out.
Oh, but
oh man. On How To, we answer your toughest questions with grace, wisdom, and humor, which is why 5 years on, we're still going strong. Listen to How To wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, we've done it. We've reached the moment in the show when we endorse our favorite cultural object we encountered in the past week. Steve, what have you got?
All right. Well, I grew up, I used to watch the Olympics every 4 years. It was like a family ritual, and at least 3, I think, Olympic cycles were hugely meaningful to me. And then I kind of lost touch with it. And funnily enough, my kids were never interested in it until this year. And they're completely, for some reason, captivated by it. I don't know via what it reached them, but it certainly wasn't me. So we've been watching. It's been really fun. Have you guys been doing the same at all? Or
no?
They've been breaking through more than they have the last few cycles in a way that's been really fun.
Okay, so this is not a spoiler. It's very easy to spoil them because, of course, they're in Paris and they take place typically before Americans watch. So you have to consume media advisedly if you've been watching them. This isn't a spoiler because this was already aired, but it is worth watching this extraordinary moment where the men's gymnastics team gets none of the same oxygen that the women's does for a variety of reasons, including they're not nearly as good. It's a somewhat interesting team. There's a black member who speaks very interestingly about what that was like to almost always be the only black kid in the gym. He's a tremendous gymnast. He's 20. In the next Olympics, he might be one of the 2 or best, if not the best gymnast in the world. Really charismatic, interesting guy. Anyway, a variety of people. And they were thought they might medal for the first time. Men's gymnastics might medal for the first time in 16 years. So there was drama. There's this one member of the team who does only one event, which is very unusual, to dedicate a spot to the team to a specialist, to a hyper specialist. His name is Steven Nedoroscik. And he is so different in look and feel from the other gymnasts in that the American men gymnasts look like really high T buff guys. And when they nail something, they're like, yeah, they're screaming, their faces are bunched, they're flexing, and then they like bump and high five and, whatever. And they just have this almost football player vibe. And off to the side is this much comparatively slighter figure with these Coke bottle glasses on, who's doing he participates, but he, in the run up to his one event, which is the pommel horse, he just sat off to the side with his glasses on, looking down, his eyes closed. He has this weird, nerdy Zen vibe. And you're like, okay, I'm hooked. Like, I got to see it.
Comes down to a 25-year-old from Worcester, Mass. Star at Penn State, now at the highest level. This is what he does. One thing, pommel horse.
It was like out of a freaking movie. So everyone else goes, they do their events, they're all screaming, they're flexing, USA, and it's getting a little jingo-y for me, a little jingoistic, right? And you're like, okay, I've fallen in love with that guy. I'm in my imagination, he's sitting there reading E.E. Cummings and trying to get, center himself. And the moment comes and the guy just stands up, he takes off his glasses, and sure enough, he's got those myopic eyes. I say this because I have them too. You take off your glasses and you look like a vole. And you're like, okay, I love him even more.
Who is this kid and where did he come from?
Biggest moment of his career.
And he walks over, and just the way he feels the surface of the pommel horse to get its chi and his chi to unite before he goes, right? And the guy fucking rockies the shit out of the moment.
First one right here, full spin on one arm. Great, he's got another one right here.
And degree of difficulty, it turns out, is highly important. It's integrated into the score now in a mathematical way. It makes a huge difference. You don't have to fully nail a really fucking hard thing.
Just got to stay focused, little bit of form break, but that's no problem at all.
So there's this premium on doing something innovative, way harder than almost anyone else can do. At a certain moment, he goes off of the handles, the 2 handles of the pommel horse, and he's just doing the swingy, leggy, roundy thing just on his hands, but it's almost got a balletic quality to it.
Important passage to get through there. And another one, okay.
And then he just does this gloriously perfect dismount.
It's a home run! Oh my God!
And he knows he's fucking nailed it, and he knows he's just delivered the first medal to his teammates and his country in 16 years for men's gymnastics.
He will be on that medal stand!
and you're like, that was fucking worth the price of admission. That was worth sitting here for hours watching so much bullshit coverage and idiotic lachrymose backstories and Toyota ads. And it was so good. It was just it was those moments that deliver a very specific hit of euphoria that only sports can do. So I really recommend just watching this dude, we'll link to it, do the pommel horse on YouTube.
Oh my God, I'm just so dying to see that moment now. That sounds profound.
Yeah, why haven't they hired you to be an Olympic commentator, Steve?
I'm definitely available.
I'm into
the swingy, leggy, roundy thing. You could bring your expertise. All right, Julia, what's your endorsement?
Oh, man, it's been a real journey over here while I've been Googling while listening to Steve talk, because what I wanted to endorse was this incredible show I saw at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris when I was there last month. And then I was heartsick to learn that, in fact, the show has already gone down. But then, dun, da, da, it's coming to the National Gallery of Art in Washington. So I shall describe it to all of you and encourage you to go see it there. The show is called Paris 1874, the Impressionist Moment, and it is very precisely about that first exhibition when the Impressionists kind of gathered together and decided to have their own show outside of the kind of classic salon structure of art in the 19th century in France, and, shocked the world with their daubs and their impressions and kind of met with resistance and excitement. And so it's a really historical show. It's very precisely about that moment. And it gathers together a huge number of works that were in that first show together, not like to the T on the wall as they would have been, but you get the sense of what you would have been looking at walking through those rooms. It also shows some of the works that were in the Salon that year. So you have a sense of what Impressionism was kind of constructing itself against. It was a knockout show. First of all, there's so much great work. Second of all, there's so much kind of weird, forgotten work, the stuff that was being lauded at the time that has not stood the test of time. And it was really fun to go to with my boys, who are now 11 and kind of able to hang with the wall text a little bit and process an art show at a museum with a little bit more depth. And they both were totally blown away just by thinking about what art is and how art exists in the context of all which came before, et cetera. And anyway, it's so cool that this show is coming to the US. So get ready. It's coming to the National Gallery of Art in Washington from September 8th, 2024 to January 19th. DC listeners and anyone who's a short Amtrak ride away, it's a great show. And obviously, like, Impressionism is so beloved and studied and has had so many big shows and moments that sometimes it's easy to forget why it is so important in history, because it almost seems anodyne and, water lily mouse padded out of being interesting. And this is just a really great, well-made show that reminds you of the importance of that moment in aesthetic history.
Fantastic. All right. Both of you have me so keen to see the things that you're talking about. All right. I don't know if I will do the same for you or for our listeners. I actually surprised myself with this endorsement, and it's maybe still tentative because I'm 2 episodes in. So in my home, we started watching the Decameron, the new Netflix series based on the Boccaccio stories. And I don't know if either of you have seen any of it. This show is at once very Netflix show, right? It's sort of, I guess, in the tradition of Bridgerton, which is a show that I really don't care for, in the sense that it's a costume period drama that looks really beautiful, but is also has this sort of cheeky modern sensibility and has a lot of sex in it, right? And knowing that it had that sort of profile going in, I wasn't inclined to warm toward it at first, but I think it's so charming and so well done, and in a strange way manages to both be modern and sort of respect the source material and the medieval sensibility. It also, the reason I was interested in watching it in the first place is that someone who was encouraging others to watch it on social media said this is the first piece of art since the pandemic that seems like it's about the plague in an interesting way, because it's sort of the OG plague text, right? The story of the Decameron being that it's the 14th century in Florence and the plague is everywhere, and some aristocrats, and at least in this version, a few non-aristocrats, flee the city, go to this isolated villa where they can wait out the plague and tell stories to each other, sort of Chaucer style. So far, the show, as 2 episodes in, has not gotten into the stories they're telling because it's still setting up who these people are and how they're getting to the villa. But it's a pretty great dark comedy. I mean, it reminds me in some ways, in a more serialized form, of Monty Python, of the medieval world of Monty Python, right? It's that kind of like historically imprecise, yet historically affectionate, right? Affectionate for the truth of history, but sort of messing around with it, right? It also has some wonderful performances, including from Sasha Mamet from Girls, who's so beautifully cast as a sort of shallow aristocrat who can't wait to get married and is utterly indifferent to all those around her dying of the plague. Perfect part for her. Really, really fun part for Tony Hale as well. Most of the actors in it I'm not familiar with, but I think a lot of them have been in previous stuff. Like there's a wonderful actress who was in Sex Education, which we only watched a few episodes of for this show. Anyway, it's very TV. It's not reinventing the form, but it's fun and bacchanalian and looks beautiful and has great costumes. And my family's really enjoying the Decameron.
I love that the Hollywood IP vacuum has gotten as far as the Decameron. That's amazing.
No, we're dipping deep into the 14th century. We're going to have to start doing Beowulf next, I guess. All right. Well, this was a fun show this week. I mean, I didn't love everything we saw. We were not crazy about Deadpool, Wolverine, Steve, you and I. Or Julia sounds like she was on the fence, but it was certainly a lot of fun to talk about.
Totally.
All right, listeners, you will find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page, which is at slate.com/culturefest. You can also drop us an email at culturefest@slate.com. Our producer is Jared Downing. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. And the composer of our theme music is Nicholas Patel. For Stephen Metcalf, Julia Turner, and Jamel Bowie, I'm Dana Stevens saying thanks so much for being a listener, and we'll talk to you again next week.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.